My husband had always strictly forbidden me from entering the guest house at the back of our property. But the sound of a baby's faint cry calling my name from within forced me to break down that locked door. I screamed hysterically. My knees gave out as I stared at the horrifying reality my family had so carefully concealed from me. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're all tuning in from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bringing you even more compelling stories. The sound of shattering glass echoed deafeningly in the spacious living room. I looked down, staring numbly at the shards of Waterford crystal my mother-in-law had just slammed onto the marble floor. The hot Earl Grey tea that had been inside now pooled, staining the expensive Persian rug I'd bought with my own savings years ago. My chest heaved my breath, coming in ragged gasps, but I could only bite my lower lip, fighting back, the tears welling in my eyes. "You useless woman," my mother-in-law shrieked, her trembling index finger pointed directly at my face. The veins in her neck bulged her face, flushed crimson with a rage that had seemingly come from nowhere today. "You should thank your lucky stars, my son agreed to marry you. That Julian was willing to pick up a sickly thing like you and make you his wife. And what do you do in return? You just stand there daydreaming, wasting the food in this house. You're nothing but a parasite." I glanced at my husband Julian, who was lounging on the dark brown leather sofa. The man I'd been married to for 4 years remained silent. He loosened the expensive Hermes silk tie around his neck, a tie I had bought him last month for his birthday, using my own private credit card, the limit of which he had no idea. Julian didn't even look at me. He was engrossed in his phone, as if his mother's shrieks tearing down his wife's dignity were nothing more than ambient background music. Not a single word of defense came from the man who had once promised my late father he would always protect me. "Mother, please keep your voice down. The neighbors will hear," Julian finally said, not to defend me, but purely out of fear that his reputation as a successful, respected man in this exclusive gated community would be tarnished. "Let them hear," his mother shot back, even more ferocious. She stepped forward, nearly treading on the broken glass near my feet. "Let everyone know how unfortunate my son is to have a barren wife like you. 4 years of marriage, and that belly of yours has never grown again after that incident. You can't give us an heir. If you can't provide a child and just want to be a leech mooching off my son's success, then you'd better pack your bags and get out of this house right now." The ultimatum shot from her mouth, sharp as a blade, twisting in my gut. Mooching. A leech. The words spun in my head, creating an irony so painful, I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. My mother-in-law knew nothing. Julian had never told her the truth. The two of them stood on the marble floor of this house, with such arrogance, completely unaware that the deed to this luxurious 2-story home was entirely in my name. This house was a wedding gift from my late father. All the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier above our heads, even the latest model Porsche parked in the garage that Julian loved to flaunt to his friends, it was all bought with my inheritance. Even the CEO position Julian so proudly boasted about, the one his mother showed off at every country club luncheon, was at my family's company. A company I co-founded with my father while I was still in college. I had stepped down from the leadership role and given the position to Julian because I loved him so deeply. I wanted to protect his ego as a man, as the head of the family, so he wouldn't feel inferior to a wife more successful than him. I suppressed my own potential, hid my true wealth, and willingly played the part of a dutiful housewife for the sake of our marriage. But this was what I got in return. Insults, scorn, and now eviction from my own home. I clenched my fists at my sides. My patience was at its breaking point. I opened my mouth, ready to shatter all their lies. I was ready to scream that they were the real parasites. I was ready to throw them out this very second. But before a single word could escape my trembling lips, a faint sound stopped my heart for a beat. The sound was so soft, nearly drowned out by my mother-in-law's enraged breathing, but my ears caught it clearly. It was the sound of crying. A child's cry. And it was coming from the back hallway, from the direction of the guest house that Julian always kept padlocked. "Mommy! Mommy!" The cry was a hoarse whisper, as if the child had been crying for hours. I froze. My blood ran cold. Julian had always strictly forbidden anyone, especially me, from going near that back hallway. He'd changed the lock on the door and installed a heavy-duty padlock. His excuse was that the space was being used as a storage facility for hazardous industrial chemicals for a company R&D project. He said the air was toxic and could worsen my mental state, which doctors claimed was still unstable since I lost our baby 2 years ago. In my ignorance and blind trust, I had always obeyed his prohibition without question. But that voice, that cry, it was so real. Julian. My voice came out, as a strangled whisper. I looked into his eyes, which had suddenly widened in panic. There's a child's voice in the back. Julian's previously relaxed face turned deathly pale. He violently shut off his phone screen and shot up from the sofa, blocking my path as I took a single step toward the hallway. "You're hallucinating again," Julian hissed, his voice forced into a calm tone that couldn't hide the sheer terror in his eyes. "It's just a stray cat on the roof or the neighbor's kid. You're out of your sedatives, aren't you? That's why your craziness is flaring up again." My mother-in-law snorted in contempt. "See, barren and crazy. Deal with your lunatic wife, Julian." I'd be mortified if the neighbors heard her screaming nonsense. "Mommy, please." The cry came again, this time louder, more heart-wrenching. My maternal instinct, buried for 2 years under a mountain of grief, suddenly erupted. I don't know where the strength came from, but I shoved Julian with all my might. He stumbled backward, crashing into a glass side table. "Move!" I screamed, ignoring my mother-in-law's shocked gasp. I ran down the long, dimly lit hallway. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. At the end of the hall, the thick oak door stood arrogantly, a massive iron padlock securing the secret behind it. The crying was undeniably coming from inside. "Stop right there," Julian yelled, chasing after me, his footsteps heavy and panicked. "Don't you dare touch that door. I told you it's a hazardous storage area. I don't care." My eyes darted around the hallway. In a corner near a shoe rack was a toolbox left behind by the gardener that morning. I ran to it, rummaging through its contents with trembling hands, until I found a heavy sledgehammer. Julian was just about to grab my arm when I swung the hammer with all my strength at the iron padlock. Clang. The first blow missed, only slightly denting the lock. Julian managed to grip my shoulder, pulling me back roughly. "Are you insane? Drop the hammer. Let go of me," I shrieked, struggling wildly. I threw an elbow back, catching him squarely on the jaw. His grip loosened. Without wasting a second, I swung the hammer again, this time aiming for the wooden door's hinges. Crack. The oak shuddered. Once more I slammed it with all the strength and desperation I possessed. Crack. The top hinge ripped away from the frame. With one final powerful kick, the thick wooden door burst open, slamming against the wall inside. I stood there, panting, letting the sledgehammer fall from my hand with a clatter onto the tiled floor. Cool air from an air conditioner washed over my face. There was no smell of toxic chemicals, no dusty stacks of boxes. My eyes widened at the scene before me. My knees instantly turned to jelly, losing all strength, and I collapsed to the floor. My mouth opened, but no sound came out except a strangled scream trapped in my throat. The room, long claimed to be a storage unit, had been transformed into a luxurious baby's nursery. The walls were decorated with cloud-patterned wallpaper. The floor was covered in soft foam mats, and expensive toys were scattered everywhere. But it wasn't the luxury that ripped my sanity apart. In the middle of the room, on a large bed, sat a woman in a thin silk nightgown. It was Sienna, Julian's distant cousin, who we were told was working out of state and only occasionally visited to borrow money. But what made my world completely and utterly shatter into a million irreparable pieces was the small child held tightly in Sienna's arms, a little boy about 2 years old. The boy stopped crying the moment the door crashed open. He looked at me with a pair of clear, round eyes. Those eyes, the shape of that nose, the curve of those lips. The toddler's face was a perfect carbon copy of my late father's. My family's lineage was unmistakably printed on that little angel's face. "Mommy," the toddler murmured softly, reaching his small hands out toward me, as if the blood tie between us spoke louder than any lie. I screamed hysterically, a long, piercing shriek that tore through the silence of the house, voicing the pain, the betrayal, and the horrifying truth that had finally been revealed before my very eyes. My vision blurred with tears that streamed down my face, unstoppable. My chest felt tight as if a giant boulder was crushing my lungs. I was still crumpled on the hallway floor, right in front of the door I had just destroyed. My eyes were locked on the little boy, now hidden behind Sienna's back. He looked frightened by my hysterical screams. Yet there was an unspoken longing in his innocent gaze, as he kept trying to peek out at me. Julian stood frozen in the doorway. His breathing was ragged, his face ashen. He glanced from Sienna to me and back again, his panic palpable. My mother-in-law, who had followed us from the living room, was now a statue behind Julian, her mouth agape at the scene inside the hazardous storage. My brain worked at lightning speed, piecing together fragments of memory that had been scattered and shrouded in a fog of grief. The events of 2 years ago replayed in my mind with terrifying clarity as if they had just happened yesterday. The meticulously crafted cruel web of lies was now laid bare, exposing my own foolishness. 2 years ago, I was at the peak of my happiness. I was pregnant with my first child, a baby I had longed for. That day the rain was pouring down. My heavily pregnant belly was suddenly seized by intense excruciating contractions. Long before my due date, I was rushed to an elite hospital downtown where I had all my checkups. I remember the tearing pain in the delivery room. I remember the blinding surgical lights and the steady beep of the heart monitor. The last thing I recall before losing consciousness was the sound of a baby's strong, piercing cry, its first cry in this world. After that, everything went black. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a cold, all-white room, an IV line in the back of my hand. The sharp smell of antiseptic stung my nostrils. I tried to move, but my entire body felt stiff and numb. Beside my bed, Julian sat with a swollen face. His eyes were red, and he held my hand tightly. When he saw me open my eyes, he burst into tears, crocodile tears that for 2 years I believed were the expression of a father's deepest grief. "Honey, you're awake," Julian whispered, then kissing the back of my hand repeatedly. "Thank God. You made it through the critical period. You were in a coma for 3 days. My first question, of course, was the only one that mattered. "Our baby. Where is our son Julian?" I asked, my voice hoarse and weak, my eyes scanning the room for a bassinet. Julian was silent for a long moment. He hung his head, his shoulders shaking as if he were suppressing an unbearable sob. Then, in a trembling voice, he uttered the words that destroyed my life. "I'm so sorry, honey. I failed to protect you both. Our son, our little boy, he didn't make it. His lungs weren't fully developed. The doctors did everything they could, but he passed away a few hours after he was born." My world collapsed. I screamed, I cried, I thrashed until the IV needle was ripped from my hand, blood staining the white sheets. I demanded to see my baby's body. I begged to hold him just for a moment. But Julian held me in a tight embrace, telling me the burial had already taken place, as the hospital had advised it be done quickly, and my comatose state made it impossible to wait. He gave me a death certificate from the hospital, complete with an official stamp and the signature of my OB/GYN. I was broken. Severe depression hit me without mercy. For months, I locked myself in my room, refusing to eat or speak, just crying while clutching the baby blanket I had prepared. My doctor prescribed a cocktail of sedatives that left me constantly drowsy, disoriented, and unable to focus. The drugs made me compliant, dulling my reason and critical thinking. It was in that fragile, semi-conscious state under the influence of the drugs that the second lie was deployed. One night, Julian came into my room with a stack of documents, his face a mask of panic and frustration. He sat on the edge of the bed, telling me that my father's company was on the brink of a massive bankruptcy. There was an embezzlement scandal involving the old board of directors, and multi-million-dollar projects were failing. "Your father's company is ruined, honey," Julian said, gently stroking my hair. "Creditors are suing. If we don't act fast, they'll seize not just the company but this house and all our personal assets. You're sick, you can't possibly handle all this." In my foolish innocence and fragile mental state, I hung on his every word. "I've spoken to a lawyer," Julian continued, handing me a pen. "You just need to sign this power of attorney and a temporary transfer of shares to me. I'll step in as CEO to face the creditors and fix the management. Let me carry this burden. Your only focus now is to get better. Trust me, I'll save your father's legacy." Without reading the dozens of pages, without consulting Arthur, my family's trusted lawyer, who was overseas at the time I signed, I handed over complete control of my wealth, my company, and my life to the man I thought was my hero and protector. Now, sitting on this cold floor, facing this secret room, all those lies peeled away one by one, revealing their rotten core. Julian never saved my company. He stole it. There was never a crisis or a threat of bankruptcy. It was all a vicious scheme he concocted with his cronies to legally seize my assets while I was vulnerable. And most diabolically of all, my son never died. I looked at the toddler again. My father's features couldn't lie. That death certificate was a forgery. The first cry I heard in the delivery room was the cry of life, not farewell. Julian must have bribed a doctor and hospital staff to fake everything. He took my own flesh and blood, separated a newborn from his comatose mother, and brought him here. And Sienna, that snake, who always smiled sweetly whenever she visited, calling me Audrey dear. No wonder she suddenly moved out of state for work a few months before I gave birth. She was hidden here in the back of my own house, living a life of luxury, enjoying my money and raising my son while I was confined to the front of the house under the pretext of my mental health. No wonder Julian always made sure I took my sedatives on time. He wasn't treating me. He was disabling me, ensuring I never had enough clarity to discover what was happening in the guest house. He used postpartum depression as a weapon to silence me and isolate me from the world. Lies, betrayal, a filthy conspiracy. They all conspired to destroy me. Julian, my own husband. Sienna, his shameless mistress. Probably that doctor, and who knows who else. I slowly pushed myself up from the floor. My tears stopped. The grief and devastation that had consumed my heart evaporated, replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. A boiling rage so hot it felt capable of burning this entire house to the ground. I looked straight into Julian's eyes, which were still frozen in terror. My gaze was no longer that of a fragile, depressed wife. This was the gaze of a mother whose child was stolen, and a rightful owner whose fortune was plundered. They thought I was weak. They thought I was crazy. They had chosen the wrong person to cross. I would make sure that from this moment on, their lives would become the most horrifying hell imaginable. I would take back my son, my fortune, and I would destroy them all until there was nothing left. A week before, I shattered that wooden door and discovered the most horrifying secret of my life. The seeds of suspicion had already begun to sprout and take root within me. The meticulously crafted web of lies my husband had woven was starting to show small, fatal tears. It began with a trivial item I accidentally found on a gloomy morning. Our housekeeper was on leave, visiting a sick relative, so I decided to sort my husband's dirty laundry myself. As I checked the pockets of his expensive Italian suit jacket, a suit bought with my credit card, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just a receipt from a fancy restaurant or a gas station. But when I unfolded the slightly wrinkled paper, my eyes fixated on the printed list. It was a receipt from an upscale supermarket. Printed clearly were 3 packs of imported toddler-sized diapers, 4 cans of premium toddler formula, 2 pairs of children's pajamas, and several educational toys. The total came to several $100s. My heart immediately started pounding. My hand trembled as I held that thin piece of paper. Why was my husband buying so many baby supplies? For whom my mind briefly went to the orphanage we often donated to, but his personal assistant usually handled all charitable purchases, not Julian himself. Moreover, these items were purchased at 10 p.m. a time when he claimed to be in an emergency board meeting. That night, my suspicion morphed into a reckless impulse I could no longer contain. My husband came home late, looking exhausted, and fell into a deep sleep right after his shower. His soft, regular snores indicated he was far gone in dreamland. I knew he felt completely secure, assuming I had taken the high-dose sedative he insisted on every night. He didn't know that for the past few days I had been flushing those damned pills down the toilet, allowing my mind to clear. As quietly as a whisper of wind, I slipped out from under our thick comforter. I got out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and tiptoed out of the master bedroom. My destination was his private study at the end of the west wing. The house was dark and silent, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the large glass windows in the living room. The night air felt colder than usual, seeping into my bones. But my curiosity was a fire that burned away the fear. I turned the doorknob to his study with extreme care. Unlocked. My husband's ego was immense. He felt he owned this entire house, so he saw no need to lock his study from a wife he considered half insane. Once inside, I switched on a small, dim desk lamp, ensuring the light wouldn't be visible from outside. The room was filled with his signature masculine cologne, mixed with the scent of paper and the leather of his executive chair. My eyes immediately went to the drawers of the sturdy mahogany desk. I tried pulling the handles one by one. The first drawer opened to reveal empty folders and stationery. The second held some meeting notebooks. But the bottom drawer was locked tight. I held my breath. My gut told me that whatever he was hiding was in that bottom drawer. I started searching for the key in every corner of the room, behind our framed photo on the desk, inside the pen holder, under a stack of thick books. Nothing. Then my eyes landed on a medium-sized digital safe neatly embedded in the bookshelf in the corner. The safe was matte black, its numerical keypad blinking softly. I approached it, my mind racing. What could the password be? I tried to remember everything about my husband. Our birthdays, our anniversary. I keyed in the numbers with a trembling finger. Error. The screen flashed red. I tried my late father's birthday, the founding date of the company he now controlled. Error A. Soft beep warned me I had one last chance before the security alarm would sound, waking the entire house. A cold sweat trickled down my temple. I closed my eyes, trying to get inside the mind of that narcissist. My husband was a megalomaniac. He worshipped himself. More than anything in the world, he craved power, wealth, and praise. To him, the most important numbers weren't related to me, but to himself. Suddenly, a memory flashed. The date he won his first major contract and made the cover of a business magazine, an achievement he relentlessly bragged about to anyone who would listen. That date was the pinnacle of his success, the day his ego was fully gratified. With a hand that still shook slightly, I punched those 6 digits into the keypad. A soft click, followed by the indicator light turning green. The steel safe door slowly swung open. I let out a long, relieved breath, then immediately knelt and pulled out its contents. There were several stacks of documents. I picked up the first one. My eyes widened as I read the letterhead. It was a loan agreement stamped in blazing red from an unofficial lending institution, or more accurately, a notoriously ruthless high-level loan shark in the city. I read the figures listed. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. My husband's total debt amounted to tens of millions of dollars. I nearly gasped. What was all that money for? I turned the page and found a breakdown of the fund transfers. My eyes caught a name I knew well as the recipient of regular fantastic sums: Sienna, his distant cousin. The money had flowed into Sienna's account, and the attached bank statements clearly showed it was used for transactions on various international online casino sites, purchases of luxury designer goods, and overseas vacations. I knew nothing about. So all this time, my husband had been leveraging my company's name to borrow from loan sharks just to fund his mistress's hedonistic lifestyle and gambling addiction. My hand reached for the second folder at the bottom of the safe. When I opened it, my world stopped spinning. It was the deed to my family's company. The same document my husband had presented to me when I was half-conscious in a hospital bed 2 years ago. But this time I could read it with a clear mind. The word temporary was nowhere to be found. The document was a complete and total relinquishment of ownership, an absolute grant of all my majority shares to my husband with not a single cent of compensation for me. And most shockingly, the signature on the notary seal, though it looked very much like mine, was clearly a professional forgery. The strokes were different from my own. He had forged my signature in front of a paid-off notary he must have bribed. I sank onto the thick-piled carpet in the study. My chest tightened, an overwhelming nausea washing over me at the filth and cunning of the man sleeping in the next room. He wasn't just a liar, he was a criminal. But amidst the devastation and heart-wrenching pain, a sharp realization emerged. I looked at the stack of loan shark documents again. My husband might seem powerful and in control on the outside. He might act like a king in this house, but he was actually standing on a ticking time bomb. My husband had one fatal weakness, an extreme phobia of poverty and public humiliation. I remembered an incident a few months ago, at a business partner's party. He flew into a blind rage at a waiter who accidentally spilled a little water on his jacket simply because he felt his pride had been wounded in front of other billionaires. He was terrified of looking poor, of looking like a failure, of looking powerless. He had built this perfect image of a successful executive, but in reality he was drowning in tens of millions of dollars of loan shark debt with interest compounding every month. This was my weapon. These documents, the secret of his dirty debt and the threat from those ruthless loan sharks, were the sharpest knife I could use to tear off his mask of arrogance. He had taken everything from me, and I would make sure he experienced a fear far greater than mere pain. I carefully put the documents back, took photos of every single page with an old smartphone I had secretly kept, and returned everything to the safe exactly as I found it. That night, as I lay beside him in our bed, I no longer felt like a betrayed wife. I was the judge and executioner scheduling the date of his demise. The weapon was in my hands. I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. Back in the present, in the hallway in front of the door I had just destroyed, time seemed to stand still. My gaze was locked on the little boy in Sienna's arms. My son, my own flesh and blood, who for 2 years I believed was dead. Julian stared at me, his face a mixture of extreme panic and rage. My mother-in-law was frozen behind him, her once arrogant expression now ashen with shock. In a split second, my survival instinct took over. I knew if I fought them physically right now I would lose. Julian was stronger, and I was on their turf, surrounded by the false narrative that I was a dangerous, mentally unstable woman. If I tried to take my son now, he could easily call his paid-off psychiatrist and have me committed, claiming I was hallucinating and acting aggressively. I couldn't be reckless. True victory required cold, hard calculation, so I played my part. I let my eyes go wide, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I pointed a trembling finger at the toddler, then looked at my husband with a vacant stare. The baby, I stammered, clutching my own hair. I let my body convulse for a moment before letting out a hysterical scream as if my sanity had finally snapped. My baby is dead. He died in the hospital. That's not my baby. A ghost. You're keeping a ghost. I threw myself onto the cold marble floor, rolling around, covering my ears and spouting nonsense. I wailed and sobbed, creating the perfect image of a grieving mother whose mind had been shattered by severe visual hallucinations. "Get her to her room quickly," Julian shouted, his voice laced with a sick relief at seeing me lose my mind. He seemed to have concluded that the years of sedatives had permanently damaged my memory. "Mother, grab her legs. Sienna, close the door. Don't let the boy see this." Roughly, my husband and mother-in-law dragged my limp body away from the guest house. They hauled me through the living room, up the stairs, and threw me onto the bed in our master suite. I continued to rave, calling for a doctor, begging for the ghost to be banished from my head. My husband wiped the sweat from his brow and approached me. He gripped my shoulders so tightly, I thought my bones would crack. "Calm down. You're just hallucinating because you forgot your medicine," he whispered, his voice artificially soft, though his eyes betrayed his panic and disgust. "There's no child back there. It's just an empty storage room. Understand? Now you sleep here. Don't come out until I open the door. This is for your own good." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked out, slamming the door. The sound of a key turning twice in the lock echoed. Click. Click. I was locked in. The moment his footsteps faded down the stairs, my crying stopped instantly. I wiped the crocodile tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. My hysterical ramblings vanished, replaced by a chilling silence. I rose from the bed, smoothed my clothes, and stood tall before the vanity mirror. The reflection showed a woman with disheveled hair and swollen eyes, but her gaze was as sharp as a dagger. The role of the passive victim was officially over. The days of crying over my fate and begging for mercy were done. From this moment on, I was the architect of their destruction. I walked to the large wardrobe in the corner. From behind a stack of thick blankets on the top shelf, I pulled out a small burner smartphone I had secretly bought with the help of our housekeeper a year ago, long before Julian fired her. This secret phone was never connected to the house's Wi-Fi and used a prepaid number no one knew. My first goal was to secure my company and all my assets so Julian couldn't use my own money to fight me. I dialed a number I knew by heart. The call connected on the third ring. "Hello, Arthur speaking." The baritone voice of a middle-aged man came through. Arthur was our family lawyer, my late father's most trusted confidant. "Arthur, it's me," I whispered, pacing near the window for a better signal. "Audrey, my goodness. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach your main number for months, but your husband kept saying you were in intensive care out of state and couldn't be disturbed." Arthur sounded both shocked and relieved. "Listen to me carefully, Arthur. We don't have much time," I cut in, my voice as cold as ice. "My husband has been lying to all of us. The share transfer documents he submitted to the notary were forged. He faked my signature. And worse, the baby they said died. My son is alive. He's being held captive in the back of this house with his mistress." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Arthur's heavy, restrained breath. "That bastard," he cursed, his voice low and seething with rage. I always felt something was off with the financial reports, but he blocked my access, citing a board restructuring. "What do you need me to do, Audrey?" "Just give the order. I will legally annihilate him this very second. I need you to freeze all company assets." I instructed my mind, working rapidly, setting up the pieces on an invisible chessboard. "Block all access to the main corporate accounts and my personal accounts that he controls. Gather all copies of the forged documents. Prepare a letter for his termination effective immediately. But don't send the letter yet. Hold everything. I want to drop this bomb when he feels at his most powerful." "As you wish, Audrey. I'll get to work with an independent audit team tonight." "What about your son? Should we call the police now?" "No. If we call the police now, he could twist the facts, say the child was an illegal adoption or a relative's, and then use my mental instability against me. I need irrefutable physical proof. Contact your connections at a forensics lab. We need an emergency DNA test." After hanging up with Arthur, I immediately dialed another number. This time it was for Maya, my best friend from college who was an investigative journalist. Maya was the only one who knew just how obsessed my husband was with his public image. Hello, Maya's voice was sleepy. Maya, it's me. Don't ask questions, just listen, I said quickly. Oh my God, Audrey, where have you been? I was about to file a missing persons report. Your husband said you were transferred to a sanatorium, Maya shrieked. I'll explain later. Right now I need your help, I said, my tone making Maya fall silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. You have connections with private investigators and forensic teams, right? I need them to get into my house tomorrow afternoon while Julian is at work. They need to get a hair sample from the baby in the guest house, and from my husband's brush in the bathroom for a secret DNA test. A DNA test. Wait. Don't tell me the baby who died. Maya's voice trailed off, her journalistic instincts quickly piecing it together. Yes. My son is alive. I confirmed, my voice trembling for a moment before hardening again. And Maya, I need you to leak the address of the guest house to a dark web forum for online gambling. My husband owes tens of millions to loan sharks taken out in his mistress's name. I want those debt collectors to show up at this house and terrorize them every single night. I want to shatter their peace. Damn, Audrey. You're playing rough. Maya chuckled softly, a dangerous edge to her laugh. Don't worry, I'll have the best forensic team there tomorrow. And as for the loan sharks, consider your address spread across every major syndicate in the city by morning. What else? I'm going to gather my arsenal, and when the time is right, I will make them beg me for death. I ended the call, hid the phone, and sat on the edge of the bed. I hugged myself, staring at the locked door with a faint, deadly smile. The hunt had just begun. They had awakened a monster inside of me, and this monster was starving for justice. Just you wait, my dear husband. The hell you built for me is about to become your grave. 2 days had passed since the door-smashing incident. For the past 48 hours, I had played the part of the unhinged, insane wife to perfection. I confined myself to the master bedroom, refusing the food trays slid under the door and occasionally letting out hysterical screams calling for my baby as if I were hallucinating ghosts. From behind the locked door I could hear my husband's self-satisfied pacing in the hallway. I heard him talking to his mother, his voice dripping with condescension. He was reassuring the old woman that my sanity was completely gone and that he would soon be arranging the paperwork to have me permanently committed to a psychiatric facility. They laughed, a greedy, chilling laugh that echoed through the house I had bought with my own money. They thought they had won. They thought I was a dead woman walking. But inside this dark room, hidden beneath a thick blanket, my eyes were blazing as I stared at the glowing screen of my secret phone. A cold, deadly smile played on my lips. Tonight, the first phase of my counterattack would begin. I wouldn't use physical violence. I would slowly dismantle my husband's sanity, rip apart his sense of security, and let his greatest phobias consume him alive. At precisely 2 a.m., when the house was deep in slumber, I opened the smart home control app on my phone. When this house was built, I was the one who designed its entire security and automation system. I had installed hidden speakers in every corner of every room, including the master bedroom, the family room, and the guest house. My husband never knew about this feature. He was too lazy to learn the technology, dismissing it as trivial. With nimble fingers, I connected my phone to the central audio system. I opened a sound file I had kept saved for 2 years, a recording of my own voice singing a lullaby interspersed with the heart-wrenching sound of a baby crying. I hit play, set the volume to maximum, and directed the output specifically to my husband's bedroom, my mother-in-law's room, and the guest house where his mistress slept with my son. Instantly, the dead silence of the night shattered. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." My soft singing echoed from the ceilings, sounding terrifyingly ethereal, like the whisper of a restless spirit. It was followed by a baby's loud, piercing cries bouncing off the walls of the expansive house. "Mommy! Mommy, help me, Mommy!" It took less than 5 seconds before I heard a panicked scream from the room across the hall. My husband bolted awake, gasping. I heard something crash to the floor, followed by his heavy, frantic footsteps. "What is that sound?" "Hey, who turned on the stereo?" he yelled, his voice trembling with fear. From the downstairs bedroom, my mother-in-law shrieked in terror. "Oh, Lord Jesus, God help us, a ghost, there's a baby ghost in the house, help." The old woman ran out of her room, swinging a broom, wildly sobbing that the ghost of her dead grandson had come back for revenge. In the guest house, the chaos was just as intense. My husband's mistress screamed hysterically, pounding on the connecting door, calling his name. "Julian, open the door. Open it. There's a crying sound in the walls, I'm scared." My husband ran back and forth like a madman, flicking light switches, mashing buttons on the TV remote, even yanking cords from the wall sockets. But the crying and singing continued unabated, as the audio system was embedded in the walls and ran on a backup power source. I sat on my bed, arms crossed in the darkness, laughing silently. The satisfaction coursing through my veins was intoxicating. I let them suffer for a full 15 minutes, before finally shutting it off with a single tap. The rest of the night was filled with a massive argument between my husband, his mother, and his mistress, each blaming the other for the haunting. The following afternoon, I launched my second attack. Last night was for his mind. Today was for his pride. My lawyer had moved quickly, freezing all assets and credit cards under my name or linked to my company's main accounts. I knew Sienna's schedule perfectly. Every Wednesday afternoon, that parasite would go to a luxury shopping mall to squander my husband's money hobnob with her fake socialite friends and show off her designer goods. Right around noon, a huge commotion erupted downstairs. I pressed my ear to the locked door. I heard the front door slam shut with incredible force, followed by the angry stomping of high heels on the marble floor. "Julian, get out here! Get out here right now!" Sienna shrieked. My husband, who was having coffee in the living room, sounded confused. "What's wrong with you? Why are you screaming like a lunatic? You come home with no shopping bags and just start yelling. You're the lunatic. You did this to humiliate me in front of all my friends, didn't you?" she wailed, her voice thick with emotion. I was at the designer boutique. I had picked out 2 limited edition crocodile skin bags in front of everyone. But when I handed them your black card, the cashier declined it. The card was declined, blocked. That bitch of a cashier looked at me like I was trash and said the account was frozen. My friends laughed at me. I've never been so humiliated. "You said you were a rich CEO, but your card gets declined for a couple of bags." "What do you mean, blocked?" My husband's voice rose in panic. His phobia of poverty and shame had been violently triggered. "That's impossible. That card has no limit. Give it to me. I'll call the bank right now." I listened to his phone call from behind the door. His tone, initially arrogant and demanding, slowly morphed into a trembling, fearful mess. "What do you mean the account is frozen on the primary owner's orders?" "I'm her husband. I'm the CEO. Hello, Slam." He threw his phone to the floor, cracking the screen. "What is going on, Julian?" Sienna demanded, her voice full of suspicion. "I don't know. The bank said all security access was changed from a central command." He sounded utterly frustrated, his breathing heavy. "None of the cards are working, and the cash in the safe. I used it to pay the interest on the loan last month." Hearing the word loan was the perfect cue for my third attack of the day. My friend Maya had done her job brilliantly. Just as the sun set, a black van and a dozen roaring motorcycles pulled up in front of our mansion's main gate. From my second-floor window, I peeked through the curtains. About 20 large tattooed men carrying baseball bats got out. They were the debt collectors from the Loan Shark Syndicate. The address my husband had guarded so carefully was now public knowledge. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of bats hitting the iron gate echoed down the street. Curious neighbors started emerging from their homes, watching the shameful spectacle unfold. "Hey, you phony CEO, get your ass out here," one of the largest men roared. "Where's our boss's money? Pay your debt, you bastard. You took tens of millions for your gambling whore, and now you're hiding in this mansion. Downstairs, all hell broke loose." My husband screamed at the security guard to lock the double gates, but the thugs just kept pounding, now throwing rocks at the first-floor windows. Crash. The sound of breaking glass was followed by my mother-in-law's terrified screams. "What debt is this? Who are these awful men?" she cried hysterically, clutching Julian's arm. "You said you were successful. You said you were rich. Why are there thugs demanding money at our door?" "Shut up, mother. Don't ask so many questions." Julian snapped, his respect for his mother instantly gone, replaced by overwhelming panic. His phobia of public shame was exploding. He was terrified of looking poor and flawed. Now all the elite neighbors he'd been showing off to were watching his downfall. His reputation was being shattered in a single night. "You owe tens of millions to loan sharks," Sienna shrieked from the direction of the guest house. "You told me that money was from company profits. If they touch any of my things, I will kill you." I leaned against the window frame, watching the chaos below with a cold, detached heart. There wasn't a shred of pity in me. They were reaping the storm they had sown. This psychological assault had successfully destroyed their sanity and sense of security. My husband was now a cornered, terrified rat. And tomorrow morning, when he had nowhere left to turn, I would deliver the killing blow that would end it all. Morning broke with a heavy, suffocating air inside the house. The remnants of last night's chaos were still evident. The shattered living room window hadn't been cleaned, and the stench of fear seemed to cling to the walls. The debt collectors had only left before dawn, after threatening to burn down the guest house if their money wasn't paid in full within 48 hours. I sat calmly at my vanity, slowly brushing my hair. I had showered, put on a clean dress, and my face no longer showed any sign of despair. My eyes were clear and sharp. I heard a key turn in the lock. The door creaked open. My husband shuffled in looking like a walking corpse. The dark circles under his eyes were cavernous, his usually immaculate hair was a mess, and his shirt was wrinkled. He looked absolutely pathetic. His hand trembled as he placed a tray with breakfast and a cup of tea, which I was certain was laced with a high dose of sedatives, on the nightstand. In his other hand, he held a brown leather folio. "Good morning, honey," my husband said, his voice forced into a gentle, loving tone, but his smile was stiff and his eyes couldn't hide his deep desperation. He was cornered, he needed cash immediately, and I was his only way out. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, letting the silence intimidate him. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of me. "You look much better today. I guess your hallucinations have subsided. Honey, I've been thinking all night. Your condition isn't going to improve here. The environment isn't good for you. I've found a premium mental wellness facility overseas. You can rest there away from all the disturbances and be treated by the best doctors." He slid the brown folio toward me, pulling a gold pen from his pocket. "You just need to sign this document. It's a guardianship consent form, so I can handle all your administration there. And because the costs are very high, I've also included a clause for the sale of this house and the liquidation of your emergency funds to cover your treatment. It's all for your own good. You trust me, don't you?" I looked down at the papers he offered. It wasn't a guardianship form. It was a forged deed of sale for the house, and a power of attorney to liquidate all my remaining bank deposits. He planned to sell my father's house to pay off his gambling debts and dump me in some far-off mental institution to keep his secrets safe forever. Cunning. A true devil in human form. Slowly I lifted my head. A small smile as cold as Arctic ice formed on my lips. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" My voice was crystal clear, calm, and sharp. No more trembling, no more insanity. My husband froze his eyes, blinking several times, shocked by the drastic change in my tone. What do you mean, honey? Don't start hallucinating again. Just sign this." Instead of taking the pen, I took the forged documents. With a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the thick papers in half, then again and again, until they were tiny scraps. I threw the pieces right in his face. They fluttered down onto his lap like dirty confetti. "You think I'm crazy," I hissed, leaning toward him, my gaze locking onto his wide, terrified eyes. "You think those damn sedatives you've been mixing into my drinks for 2 years managed to kill my brain? You are so wrong. You're lucid. But yesterday, you were screaming." "Of course I was screaming yesterday," I cut him off sharply. I stood up from the bed, towering over him as he remained frozen in his chair. "I had to pretend I'd lost my mind so you'd feel safe leaving me alone in this room, so you wouldn't suspect I was busy weaving the noose for your neck." I walked to the wardrobe, reached into the bottom of a pile of old clothes, and pulled out a thick white envelope my lawyer had delivered at dawn via a folding ladder to my window. I walked back to my husband and slammed the envelope down on the table in front of him. The loud smack made him jump. "Open it," I commanded. My voice, the voice of the sole owner, not a dependent wife, echoed with an authority that could not be denied. My husband's hands shook violently as he broke the seal. He pulled out several sheets of paper. "That is my first weapon to destroy you," I said coldly, pointing to the first page he held. His eyes scanned the paper, and his face instantly turned as white as the sheet itself. "It's a DNA test from a private forensics lab. 99.99% match. The son you declared dead, the son you provided a forged death certificate for. You kidnapped my own flesh and blood, separated him from his mother, and gave him to your gambling good-for-nothing mistress. This isn't real. Where did you get this? It's a fake," my husband stammered, his breathing ragged. He was trying to deny it, but the terror in his eyes screamed the truth. I laughed, a cynical, humorless sound. "Go ahead, try denying it in court. My friend brought a forensic team into this house yesterday afternoon while you were busy begging the bank to unblock your cards." I didn't give him a moment to breathe. I snatched the second paper and shoved it in his face. "And this is my second weapon. Read it." It was the independent financial audit of my company, juxtaposed with copies of the loan shark agreements I'd photographed from his safe. "The company was never bankrupt 2 years ago. You are the one who bankrupted it now," I seethed. You forged my signature on the share grant. You manipulated the financial reports, and you used my company's name to borrow tens of millions from loan sharks to fund your mistress's lifestyle. The money that should have been my son's inheritance you burned at a casino table. I can explain, my husband squeaked. The arrogance and conceit he had worn for years as a mask now shattered into a million pieces. The narcissistic man who worshipped himself had shrunk into the most pathetic creature I had ever seen. He fell to his knees on the marble floor, trying to grab the hem of my dress, but I stepped back in disgust. There is nothing to explain, I cut him off. I tossed the last paper, a letter with my company's official letterhead, at his chest. And that is your first punishment. My husband picked up the paper with trembling hands. He read it, and his sobs broke free. It was the decision from an emergency shareholders meeting led by my lawyer. Termination for cause, I said, savoring every second of his destruction. As of this moment, you are no longer CEO. You have no position. You have no company. You have no access to a single cent of my money. Your credit cards are dead. Your bank accounts are frozen. And the men who were banging on your gate last night will be back tonight to collect the tens of millions you will never be able to repay in your lifetime. Please, I'm begging you, honey, he wailed, crawling to hug my legs. Forgive me. I made a mistake. I was blinded by greed. Don't do this to me. Those loan sharks will kill me. Please pay my debt. You're so rich you can save me. For our marriage, I kicked him away, sending him sprawling. The rage I had suppressed for so long erupted like a volcano. You traded our marriage the day you faked our son's death. You were dead to me from that moment on. Suddenly, the door flew open. My mother-in-law entered, looking confused and holding a small grocery basket. Julian, what's wrong? Why are you crying on the floor? The old woman cried, rushing to her son's side. She glared at me. You crazy witch, what have you done to my successful son? My allowance is short. Tell this parasite wife of yours to get me some money. Shut your mouth, I roared, my voice thundering, stopping her tirade. I stared at the old woman who had insulted me for years with eyes full of hatred. Your successful son is nothing but a white-collar thief. He has nothing. This house is mine. The company is mine. The car you show off to your friends was bought with my money. And right now your son is tens of millions of dollars in debt to the thugs who smashed our windows last night. My mother-in-law froze the basket, dropping from her hands. She looked from her sobbing, pathetic son on the floor to me, slowly realizing that all her false pride was nothing but dust in the wind. I walked past them, both flinging my bedroom door wide open. The air of freedom washed over me. Your time in this house is over. Tomorrow I'm taking this nightmare to the next level. I looked at them with the smile of a conqueror. You think you've seen the worst of it. Trust me. The real judgment has only just begun. That evening the sky was overcast, as if the universe itself was preparing to witness a long-awaited spectacle of justice. Although my husband had been utterly destroyed before me that morning, my mother-in-law, it seemed, possessed a level of arrogance and ignorance beyond salvation. Unaware that her precious son had just lost an entire company and was being hunted by what were essentially hitmen disguised as debt collectors, the old woman stubbornly proceeded with her vile plan. She had sent out invitations 2 days prior. From my second-floor window, I watched as luxury cars began to line the street in front of my house. My mother-in-law had invited the head of the homeowners association, local community leaders, the socialite women from our exclusive neighborhood, and all the relatives from my husband's side of the family. She had even hired an expensive catering service, no doubt, on a credit card she didn't yet know I had blocked, to serve a lavish spread in the backyard. A large white tent had been erected. Chairs draped in satin were neatly arranged, facing a small stage equipped with a projector screen. Her purpose for this event was heinous. Under the guise of a prayer gathering for a sick family member, she planned to announce to the world that I had permanently lost my mind. She wanted to build a public narrative that I was a dangerously unstable wife, giving her son a socially and legally justifiable reason to ship me off to a psychiatric facility overseas and then sell this house. She wanted to cleanse her family's name before disposing of me like trash. I stood before the large mirror in my room. The worn-out nightgown that had been my uniform for the past 2 years was now in the trash. Tonight I would not appear as a victim. I opened my old wardrobe and pulled out an elegant, sharply tailored pantsuit in a powerful navy blue. I did my makeup, carefully concealing the dark circles under my eyes, and applied a dark red lipstick that screamed courage and authority. I styled my hair into a neat, commanding updo. When I looked at my reflection, I no longer saw the depressed woman mourning a fake death. I saw a rightful owner, a CEO, and a mother ready to tear the throat out of anyone who dared to harm her child. At 7 p.m. sharp, the event began. The clinking of silverware and the buzz of conversation drifted up to my room. Through a crack in the door, I heard my friend Maya slip in through a side entrance carrying a black laptop bag. She gave me a thumbs up from the top of the stairs, signaling she had successfully hacked into the projector system and was awaiting my cue. I stepped out of my room and walked down the second-floor hallway. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice echoing through the speakers. She was standing on that small stage holding a microphone, her hands adorned with thick gold bracelets, gold bought with my inheritance. "Ladies, gentlemen, and my dearest family," her voice quivered, feigning deep sorrow. "Thank you for coming tonight. It truly breaks my heart to air our family's private struggles, but we have no other choice. My daughter-in-law, my beloved son's wife, has completely lost her mind since the tragic loss of her baby 2 years ago. Lately, she's been having violent outbursts, destroying things and hallucinating ghosts in this very house." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the guests. A few of the socialites whispered to each other, shaking their heads. "My son has tried to be the most patient husband imaginable," she continued, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "He has worked day and night running the company while caring for his mentally ill wife. But for the safety of us all, and for her own good, our family has decided to send her to an intensive mental care facility tomorrow morning. We ask for your prayers that the process goes smoothly." My husband sat in the front row. He didn't dare look at the stage. His face was ashen, his body trembled, and his shirt was soaked with cold sweat. He knew what was coming, but his fear of the loan sharks and his public shame had paralyzed him. Beside him sat his mistress Sienna, holding my son, who was wearing a knitted hat to obscure his face from the guests. The snake occasionally patted my husband's back, pretending to be a supportive relative. My fury peaked seeing my child in that woman's lap. It was time to end this cheap circus. I descended the marble staircase, my steps slow, deliberate, and loud, the sharp click of my heels echoing. Click. Clack. The sound cut through the silence that followed my mother-in-law's speech. One by one, the guests turned toward the source of the sound. Their murmurs stopped. Their mouths fell slightly open. They had been expecting a crazed woman with wild hair and dirty clothes who would need to be dragged away by nurses. Instead, they saw a poised, powerful-looking career woman dressed impeccably, who met their gazes with sharp, sane eyes. My mother-in-law froze on the stage, the tissue dropping from her hand. Her jaw went slack at the sight of me. Why are you out of your room? Go back, get back to your room now," she shrieked, forgetting to turn off the microphone, her shrill voice blasting through the garden. I ignored her. I walked through the crowd of guests who automatically parted to let me pass. My gaze was locked on my husband, who was now slumping in his chair as if trying to melt into the ground. Sienna clutched my son tighter, her face pale. I ascended the 3 steps to the small stage and stood directly in front of my mother-in-law. Without a word, I snatched the microphone from her trembling hand with a single sharp tug. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." My voice was calm, clear, and full of authority. No hysteria, just absolute control. Please forgive this little interruption. My mother-in-law has always had a flair for the dramatic. She says I'm crazy. She says I'm hallucinating. Tonight, let's see who is truly insane and who has been living in a filthy illusion of lies. I glanced toward the corner of the garden where Maya stood behind the tech table. I gave a single nod. Instantly, the large projector screen behind me, which had been displaying a "Get well soon" message, went black. The next second, a massive document filled the screen. It was the DNA test result bearing the logo of a renowned forensics lab and a very clear red seal. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the first truth," I said, pointing at the screen. 2 years ago, my husband declared that the baby I gave birth to had died. He buried an empty coffin and gave me a forged death certificate. Why? Because he kidnapped my own son from the hospital, brought him to this house, hid him in the guest house, and let his mistress raise my flesh and blood. The garden erupted. Gasps and shocked cries came from the women. The men stood up from their chairs, their faces a mask of disbelief. All eyes turned to Sienna, who was now trembling with fear as she held the toddler. "It's a lie. She's slandering my son. She's crazy," my mother-in-law shrieked, trying to grab the microphone back. But I shoved her hard, and she stumbled and fell to the stage floor. "Slander," I laughed coldly. The screen changed. Now it displayed screenshots of bank statements, proof of transfers to online gambling sites, and the loan agreement with the loan sharks. The second truth, my voice grew louder, drowning out the murmurs. "The man you've all known as a successful CEO is actually a thief and a gambler. He forged my signature to seize my father's company. And do you know where the company's money went? He borrowed tens of millions from loan sharks to fund his mistress's lavish lifestyle and gambling addiction. The man you call a success is a criminal being hunted by thugs. Stop it! Please stop! My husband suddenly screamed from his seat. He threw himself to his knees on the grass, sobbing uncontrollably in front of hundreds of eyes, now staring at him with utter disgust and contempt. His greatest phobia had become a reality. His pride was being stripped bare in front of the very public he sought to impress. The projector screen changed again. This time it showed hidden camera footage of my husband and Sienna plotting the illegal sale of this house and my commitment to the psychiatric facility. The evidence was irrefutable. Their recorded voices echoed clearly, destroying any possible defense. At that exact moment, the wail of police sirens blared from outside the gate. Flashing red and blue lights swept across the house. Seconds later, a dozen uniformed police officers entered the garden, led by my lawyer Arthur, whose face was grim and determined. "Good evening." "We're with the police," an officer announced. He walked straight to my husband, still prostrate on the grass. "Julian Croft, you are under arrest for forgery of state documents, kidnapping of a minor, corporate embezzlement, and attempted medically induced manslaughter. You have the right to remain silent." Officers swiftly handcuffed my husband. He didn't resist. He just wept, snot and tears mixing on his pathetic face. Two female officers approached Sienna. She tried to fight, screaming and cursing as they separated my son from her arms. I stepped down from the stage and ran toward my son. As the officer held him, my terrified child turned to me. He stretched out his tiny arms, tears streaming down his face, and called out in his toddler's lisp, "Mommy, Mommy!" I took him into my arms. I held his small body tightly, burying my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him that had been stolen from me for so long. Tears of joy and relief poured down my face, soaking his little shoulder. "Mommy's here, baby. Mommy will never let you go again. You're safe now," I whispered over and over. Amidst the chaos, as my husband and his mistress were dragged toward the police cars, followed by the jeers of the neighbors, my mother-in-law crawled off the stage. She approached me, her face streaked with tears, her hand trying to grab my suit. "My daughter, please, please don't send my son to prison. I beg you, forgive him. I'm your mother-in-law. You can't do this to us," she whined. I took a step back, looking down at her. The embers of my rage still burned. "Forgiveness is not available for demons who applauded my suffering," I said coldly. I motioned to several of the community security guards. "This house is my property. I want this old woman removed from my property tonight. Do not allow her to take anything but the clothes on her back. Remove the necklace, bracelets, and rings she is wearing. They were all purchased with money embezzled from my company." "What? You can't just throw me out on the street." "I'm an old woman, it's cold tonight," she shrieked, struggling as two guards took her by the arms. They forcibly stripped her of the gold jewelry she so loved to flaunt. "You once called me a parasite, didn't you?" I asked her, leaning in close. "Now you get to feel what it's like to be a parasite that has lost its host. The exit is that way. You should pray your son's loan sharks don't find you sleeping on the sidewalk tonight." Her screams echoed through the night, but not a single guest tried to help her. They looked at the old woman with disgust. She was dragged out through the high iron gates and thrown onto the cold, dark pavement. The gate was slammed shut and locked. I stood in the middle of the garden, holding my son, who had now fallen asleep in my arms, exhausted from crying. The night wind blew across my face, carrying away all the suffering, pain, and lies that had once filled this house. The overcast sky began to drizzle, as if washing away the sins that had taken root here. Justice had been served. This public humiliation was the most fitting punishment for their arrogance. That night, I didn't cry. I smiled. A smile of absolute freedom. 3 years have passed since that night of judgment that sent shockwaves through the city. Time has flown like an arrow, never looking back. The grief, pain, and tears that once drowned me in that big house now feel like the remnants of a nightmare from another life long since over. I stand before the panoramic glass window of my 25th floor office. The bright morning sun of the city warms my back. I sip my strong black coffee, the bitter taste invigorating. Behind me, my large mahogany desk is covered with documents for new projects, international partnership proposals, and financial reports showing a steep upward trajectory of profit. Since I reclaimed my position as CEO, my father's company has not only recovered from the brink of bankruptcy my ex-husband caused, but has also grown into one of the country's industry giants. I run it with an iron fist and a velvet glove. There is no naive foolishness left for anyone to exploit. Arthur, now head of our internal legal department, ensures every loophole is sealed shut. Excuse me, Madam CEO. A soft voice interrupts my thoughts. It's Maya, whom I appointed as the head of public relations for her brilliant handling of the media. She peeks in a wide smile on her face. The meeting with the Japanese investors is wrapped up. You're free for the day. Don't forget your promise to a certain little prince. I put down my coffee cup and smile. Of course, I could never forget my pickup duty. I straighten my suit, grab my handbag, and walk out of my office building feeling light and free. My private driver is waiting in the lobby. We navigate the city traffic toward an elite international kindergarten in a lush green neighborhood. Just as our car pulls up, the final bell rings. A moment later, a 5-year-old boy with a rocket ship backpack bursts out of the glass doors running at full speed. His face is beaming, his eyes sparkle with intelligence, and his laughter rings through the afternoon air. "Mommy, mommy," he shouts joyfully. He leaps into my arms, nearly knocking me over with his surprising strength. I catch him, swing him around in the air, and cover his chubby cheeks with kisses. "Hello, my champion." "How was school today? Did you make a nice painting?" I ask, ruffling his thick black hair. "It was great. I painted a super-duper big rocket. Can we put it on the fridge, mommy?" he chatters happily. There is no longer any trace of fear or childhood trauma on his face. He has grown into a loving, confident, and incredibly bright child. He is the center of my universe, the reason for every breath I take and every battle I win. After buying him his favorite chocolate ice cream, we sit on a park bench. As my son messily devours his treat, my phone vibrates. A message from Arthur. It's the annual status report on the people who once destroyed my life. Though I've banished them from my thoughts, monitoring their suffering is a small routine that ensures justice continues its course. I open the attached PDF. My eyes scan the formal report. My ex-husband was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security prison with no possibility of parole. The judge showed him no mercy. But the state's punishment was only the beginning of his true hell. The report states that the loan sharks, having lost tens of millions, never let him go. Since Julian was bankrupt, they used their network inside the prison system, paying off other inmates to torture him daily. My ex-husband, the megalomaniac who was once so obsessed with his looks, has now lost half his teeth. His nose is permanently broken, his body is covered in cigarette burns, and he has been forced into servitude cleaning toilets for other Reftagem prisoners. He lives in a state of perpetual terror, waking up screaming every night, begging for a death that never comes. He is paying the price for his darkest phobia, having become the most wretched, impoverished trash in the most isolated place on earth. I scroll to the next page. Sienna's fate is not much different. She was sentenced to 15 years in a women's correctional facility. The beauty she once used to seduce other women's husbands has faded completely. She works in the prison laundry, her hands raw and calloused from washing endless piles of filthy clothes. There are no more designer brands, no more luxury vacations. Her family disowned her, ashamed by the viral news of her affair and kidnapping charges. She is rotting alone in belated regret. On the final page is a small investigative report on my ex-mother-in-law. After I threw her out, she was rejected by every relative she had. Ashamed to be associated with her, they slammed their doors in her face. Too proud and stubborn to go to a state-run nursing home, she ended up on the streets. The woman who once wore thick gold bracelets and looked down on others now spends her days pushing a rickety cart, collecting cardboard and plastic bottles. She sleeps on newspapers, under a damp, foul-smelling overpass. The report mentions that my company's security has caught her several times standing across the street, staring up at my office window, weeping, perhaps regretting she threw away a daughter-in-law who could have given her the life of a queen. Before she can ever get close, the guards always chase her away like a stray dog. I close the document and lock my phone. There is no triumphant glee, only a profound sense of peace. Karma never misses its mark. It collects its debts with perfect accuracy, returning every tear and every ounce of suffering to its creators multiplied. "Mommy, I'm done," my son's voice pulls me from my thoughts. He holds up his empty ice cream cup with a big toothy grin. I chuckle, taking a napkin to gently wipe the chocolate from around his mouth. "Good job. Okay, let's go home. Mommy's going to make your favorite dinner." "Yay, sausages," he cheers, hopping off the bench. He takes my hand, his small fingers gripping mine with a strength that holds my entire heart. We walk side by side toward the waiting car. The afternoon breeze ruffles my son's hair. The sun dips toward the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. Walking away from a dark past, I realized the most valuable lesson. They tried to destroy me, to lock me away, to steal my sanity. They thought I was weak prey, but they forgot one crucial thing. When you try to bury a mother and take her child, you are not planting a seed of despair. You are sowing the seeds of a hurricane, and when that hurricane grows, it doesn't just blow the roof off your house. It flattens your entire world. I get into the car, hug my son once more, and look ahead. The past has been burned to ashes. Now there is only a bright future for me and my son. A new life built on a foundation of true strength that can never be broken again.